The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the individual participants and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any organization. The participants are expressing their personal opinions and perspectives. Today we are going to talk about a project called Snapshot Europe, which is in general deploying trial cameras and based on that doing science and research on wild animals. But we specifically going to talk about part of this project that is happening close to home in Wicklow, Snapshot Wicklow. And obviously talking about Wicklow, we are going to talk about deer, but also going to talk about some other native mammals and the project in general and the research that is going on, how those photos are used and so on and so forth. And obviously, this is Conservation and Science podcast, where we take a deep dive into topics of ecology, conservation, and human-wildlife interactions. And I'm Tommy Serafinsky. I always try to bring you diverse perspectives on the environmental topics that I cover, and that means that sometimes you may hear views and opinions that you not necessarily agree with, and that's okay. That's what we do. We need more dialogue and understanding rather than division and fighting. So in other words, I want you to listen to voices you may have not listened to otherwise. And today, our guest, obviously, there's only one choice of a guest when we're talking about deploying trial cameras and tracking animals and analyzing the data. And he is a great friend of the podcast. He is a listener of a podcast. He is also a previous guest on the podcast, previously on the episode 89. Back then, PhD student. And so today, he's back, the one and only Dr. Adam Francis Smith. Adam, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Tommy. It's really good to be back and really exciting to get to talk about this project and Snapshot Europe in general.
You seem like you're specializing with like a trail cameras and gathering photos, analyzing that data. That is your jam, right?
I really think so. I mean, at least when it comes to what's going on in Ireland, I spent so much time in Europe, in Germany, in Eastern Europe, working with and training and learning from absolutely amazing scientists who were really leveraging camera traps or trail cameras as tools for conservation, for management, for pure research as well. And I feel like when I was there in Europe as an Irish person, thinking we don't do enough of this because the data that you get is so powerful and it has so many applications. I really wanted to bring that home, and I started doing that with the Snapshot project in 2021.
Listen, I got to ask you before we dive into the more serious stuff. Was there like over the years, and you've been deploying those cameras in many, like you said, many locations across Europe. Was there ever a moment, was there any memorable moment when you open the camera, when you look at the footage, it's like, oh, damn it, I can't believe I caught that?
Yeah, I would say there's probably a few. And the way it always worked is because there was so many different project areas and sometimes it was small amount of cameras, sometimes a lot. I wasn't always there for the collection of the cameras, so I would get an upload from our colleagues who did the training with me and were participating in the project, and that was always a really exciting time. And I think for the most part, every camera I've ever deployed or been part of that project, I've checked every photo. So I remember some pretty memorable moments. I think a herd of bison in the Ukrainian Carpathians coming across the cameras was really a special one for me. I think, we put the cameras quite low to the ground, and you can really tell then based on the size of the trees and the environment around it and the perspective of the camera, just how big, they are. Again, I think stuff like lynx and wolves, they always get your heart beating a little bit faster when you see them. Bears, you've put your boots on the ground in that spot, and then to know that a bear was there, came back there, that also gets my heart going because, I'm very lucky in a sense. I haven't come across a bear working in the wilds, but I don't think I would like to, but how special, they are as well. And then, I'm kind of more developed. I mean, I started my master's on deer. I was always a deer person, but with the Irish work, I've sort of had a deer focus and a deer management focus. And there is something always special about seeing a new fawn with the hind walk past, or a new fawn with the doe walk past the camera, or a hind with a calf, as well as a big stag or a big buck. There's just something really special about that as well. And then there's always people, we have really strict privacy controls on the cameras, but because they get checked first before they go through our sort of privacy GDPR protocol, I get to see people walking by, and never really seen anything that strange. But mushroom pickers really love to show off their haul, So I have a lot of pictures, or I've seen a lot of pictures of people presenting their mushrooms from the forest.
Seriously, to the camera?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Also, they see the camera there, and it's like, hey, look at this.
Yeah. They go. Sometimes they go through their whole bag
Really?
to show every one of them. Yeah, especially if they've got some nice ones. So.
Oh, this is funny. So now for the listeners, that's just a heads up. We've been hanging out in the one where you were collecting the cameras, and we shoot some material on it. I am intending to put a video on my YouTube channel from this, and listeners of the podcast know that I already done that before. It's like, oh, it's going to be video. And that video never showed up because this is just podcast is the main focus. But I'm really going to try this time around. But just to make sure that because we have some good footage, I'm going to play now a clip from where we were out and while we were trying to retrieve the camera, collect the camera. And folks, those of you who are in audio only version, then you can enjoy us talking and enjoy the ambient sounds. But really, people who are watching that on YouTube or on Spotify, reminder, Spotify is a video platform these days, you can see the footage from the woodland. Don't really know how it's gonna play out, but we're gonna fetch the first camera.
Yeah, first camera of the morning. We're in the Clara Vale in central County Wicklow, and as part of our Snapshot Europe project in Wicklow, we've a couple of cameras in this valley, a couple of cameras at the top of the valley, all the way down to where the river is, and that's where we are now. So we're going to see if we can recover our camera. Hopefully it hasn't been swept away by storm waters the last few days, but yeah, ready to rock?
Let's do it.
Let's go. We just need to find a good gap down this into this kind of floodplain area. There's a lot of water, so hopefully we don't get too wet. I actually don't know where to go down. Here's not too bad if you're happy you won't fall. Yeah, so on a normal day, there's not water here. It's probably a popular place for people to come and camp and stuff. I've seen like old campfires here before, but fingers crossed nobody messed with our camera. Let's go see. Right, I think it's over here somewhere. We have it. So our camera is here, but I think it might have gotten wet from the floodwaters. We'll have to see.
The waterproofing on it is it good enough for it to survive?
It's a throw of the dice. If it dries out fast enough, it can be. But sometimes the camera dies and the memory card survives, so we'll have to see. Just some spider webs, nothing to be concerned about. As long as you don't get bit. It's alive.
Hey!
56% battery and 1900 photos. So last night There was a deer,
Oh,
2 deer. There's a mouse or something. There's something sitting in the middle here. Oh, and there's the water, look.
ooh.
I wonder if we have a daytime photo. Wow. And there's an otter. How good is that? See him?
Yeah. How often do you lose the camera to the elements or to the anything, right? Like in this case, we were talking like, or was it flooded? Was it not flooded? So is it happening? Is it happening often that you lose the camera due to, either flooding or some other events, stolen, for example?
Yeah, I mean, it can absolutely happen. The cameras themselves even deteriorate over time. They are just plastic and circuit boards at the end of the day. Generally, we've had pretty good luck so far because our cameras are in these metal protective boxes, which we can lock. That keeps a little bit of the elements at bay. Creepy crawlies love to hang out inside those boxes with the camera, but it certainly stops most of the rain. For example, we have a partner project in Connemara for Snapshot Connemara in Galway that definitely did lose some camera traps to the elements. A kind of western constant drizzly rain did seem to affect some of the cameras, and they were in more open areas than most of the Wicklow cameras, for example. Stolen cameras, a good kind of rule of thumb is 5% loss per year. So if you are above that, you're doing pretty well. And luckily, we don't have anywhere close to that. Actually, I think we've only lost 2 or 3 since 2021. So that's quite a number of deployments. Nearly, I think, 200 camera trap deployments in total to only lose 1%. That's doing pretty good. I think it speaks to how hidden the camera can be when it's placed in just a really what we call like a systematic random spot. Just something kind of representative of the forest. And as well as that, the kind of community, people aren't really interested in pulling a single camera off a tree unless they're doing something that they really shouldn't, or that they believe that their want of that camera is more important than the science that we're doing.
Well, or people are just very delighted they're showing their mushrooms and stuff.
Yeah, that's by far and away what the most reactions are: waving and pointing and oh, what's that? And then everyone moves on.
Good to hear. Good to hear that the reactions are like friendly, let's say, rather than hostile. Listen, maybe we're talking long enough already. Tell us for the listeners, what is Snapshot program? What is Snapshot Europe? What part of that program constitutes the deployments that are happening in Ireland?
Yeah, so Snapshot Europe is it's basically a collaborative program of researchers across Europe that simultaneously and with the same methodology deploy wildlife cameras or camera traps. And what we do is we pool the results, the photos which come from the project. They get pooled together, analyzed together, and are published together as a single data set. So that's actually coordinated by the Max Planck Institute for Animal Behavior in Germany. And we are simply a partner in the project. So it started originally that I knew that nobody in Ireland was going to participate unless, I put a bit of pressure on my colleagues back here and for me to travel back to Ireland and do it. So that's what we did starting 2021. And since then, we've kind of tried to have a little bit of a snowball, getting a couple of other universities, researchers involved. And, that's kind of escalated to 9 sub-projects in Ireland this year. So I'll just list those really quickly. That's Wicklow, the Sleeve Blooms, Glengariff Nature Reserve, Killarney National Park, Urrock Wood in Kerry also, Moore Hall in, so with three Western projects, Moore Hall, we have Wildefin, and we have Connemara. I actually think there's only 8. I think I said 9, but there's 8. unless I'm leaving someone out, in which case, there is one more, which is Park na Siúnta na Mara, the new national park on the Dingle Peninsula. So, phew, glad I didn't forget them, because my colleagues there would not have been happy with me. But of course, they're doing a great job.
We would record that afterwards and just edit that
We'd fix that one.
Fix it in post, bro.
Exactly. No, so 9 projects, stemming from what I originally started in Wicklow with 20 camera sites. That there's nothing cooler than that. We're well over 150 locations with cameras monitoring, all the same protocols, all the same approach, and the idea to be as collaborative as possible and to really show a kind of high standard of wildlife monitoring that really didn't exist in Ireland before that. Obviously, people were able to do camera projects before, but what we're trying to do is have a really unified approach so that we can make comparisons within the areas where we do monitoring. We can make comparisons between the areas. We can come back to MPWS and say, here's where the protected species are. Here's where the invasive species are. These things are really important. And up until this point, there hasn't been a camera trap project at all that really has done that on such a broad scale.
And is that the primary differentiating factor of Snapshot Europe, that this is so uniform as well, and the deployment is governed by the same rules?
Yeah, I think so, and I think the long-term aspect as well. This is our 5th year in Wicklow doing it. One study, 1 year is just one data point at the end of the day. 2 years, a comparison. 3 years is a trend. So then you can start making, linking that to the factors that are going on around us all the time. So one of the big ones for me and my sort of selfish interest in Snapshot, and why I wanted to start it as well, was for the deer management. And so we're basically the only people who have, really systematic data before and after, some kind of national deer management is being implemented, which is great, because we can help to assess the efficacy of that management.
And we're definitely gonna come back to that. But right now, I want to play another clip from our trip, from our excursion, where you explaining the placement of the cameras and how you're placing the cameras, which speaks to this uniform aspect of everything is deployed in the same way.
Otters, pine martens, those are close to the ground. It's not big and obvious like a deer or a fox. So it just goes to show the importance of the positioning of the camera.
Are you remember last time we spoke about it, you go all the cameras are pointing north and so on. Is it also this way?
Yes. So this direction here is north. This is up towards the source of the river, and we do that because it keeps the setup of cameras really systematic, really consistent. It helps us to reduce bias and stop us pointing the camera at exactly what we want to point it at. Everyone wants to point it at a trail or a scrape where they know that they're going to get loads of stuff, but we try our best to do something that's representative of the forest. So this is basically flooded mixed woodland. If you look around, we've got oak, we've got a couple of conifers. It's a area that flooded on the camera. We can even see that. So I think we got a good representation of this part of the valley. And like that, when we move up to the plantations, we're looking for a spot where we can have a good view on the camera, but it's representative of that plantation. It's not the only, nice spot in the whole.
And it follows the same pattern of the cameras that are placed everywhere else.
Pretty much, yeah. So we do this across the centre of County Wicklow, 60 cameras, but we also do it in a couple of other project sites around the country. And we try to follow that as systematically as possible. So because here it's such a mix of land uses, it's really like forests, fields, private, public land. We have to go forest to forest with our systematic random design. But in other places, especially if we're working in a national park, we have the full national park to work with, and we can be even more systematic. We can do like grid-based designs, which work really well for spacing the cameras. You know that you've got the good representation of the whole area and stuff like that. Yeah. All of our cameras are spaced a couple of kilometers apart. It means that we can get more area covered, and we don't see the same animals twice, or we expect not to. And it means that we better sample the whole population of animals rather than a couple of individuals that live in the same forest area, for example.
I remember it was on the all Irish mammal conference. You had a wonderful presentation, actually probably more than one. I don't remember exactly. I think you had the two.
I had two. I had one which was part of my PhD work, which was pan-European, and then I had the slightly shorter one, but the award winner, which was the Snapshot Europe Irish sub-projects.
It was a well-deserved award winner. But one thing that I remember to this point is that you initially bought those camera traps with your own money and started placing those in as a part of a project. So kudos for dedication and wanting to take that project off the ground. What motivates you? What was going through your head? Because I don't think there's a lot of people who would take, it's not like your business. It's not like you're starting a business. It's not like you start doing a startup and you investing money. You're just genuinely doing like a scientific project to gather data, and so you didn't do that with the view like, oh, I'm gonna be rich one day, right? This is an investment. You were like,
no, obviously not.
You were like, right? So just for the listeners, just to be clear, right? Because there's always one who listening is like, oh, these scientists, they're making millions on science. There are millions in science. So just to dispel that, you actually took your own money to put the camera traps on the trees to get that project off the line. What was the motivation?
Sure, and for anyone who wants to know what a PhD student salary is like, you can go and check it. It's not that much, and even a couple of camera traps, you're already into the thousands of euro. I think I'd sort of, there was a realization and there was a motivation. I think the realization was that nobody is doing it, and if I don't link in with my previous university, which I'm now working for again, which is UCD, that basically no one would do it. And then there's a secondary, maybe even two secondary motivations. I was really interested in Irish wildlife. I always was. Just so happened that I got a project in Europe, so I always had an idea to go back and help and participate as much as possible. But also as an Irishman and a European, and being very well, connected within Europe, and seeing all of these countries and all of the researchers I know in all of these different countries, coming together and saying, well, we're going to work together and pool our data and, participate in this grassroots project, essentially. I felt I had to represent Ireland in that way. I felt like we could not be off the map on this one. And so, what I essentially did was I first rang my colleagues in UCD, then only to be told, no, you're crazy, you have enough work to do, don't do that. And then I went through with it anyway, buying cameras with my own money, and they came back and bailed me out of half of those cameras. And I've had absolutely full support from them ever since. And I have to really credit, my professor, Simone Ciuti, for just being an absolute, pillar in terms of support, helping, me get the right connections, helping me think about the science. He's been super fantastic. And there's been, since then, so many great people participating in Snapshot Europe. In Wicklow, I have to credit Rewild Wicklow with, approaching me and saying, we want to be part of this as well. How can we be part of it? We got, great support through the grants there. Our volunteers, led by our chairperson, Danny Alvey, it's just been super fantastic. And then Quilcha, MPWS, private landowners, everybody's been really, really helpful and really supportive. So I am just I'm just the tip of that spear. There's so much force behind me as well. It keeps me going when I've gone through the 200,000 photo of the day. But that's essentially how it developed into what it is now.
And by the way, shout outs to Simone. We're supposed to, if you're listening to this, we still need to do that podcast. I'm gonna email you. I'm not gonna give up easily. Maybe we'll get him on a podcast eventually. Adam, so the data is open access.
It is after there's basically a process for it. So 2021 and 2022, that data is about to be made public. So there's a small embargo period because essentially what happens is it's put into a summary paper. It's just a data paper. There's very little real analysis in there, but basically describes and summarizes what's happened across all of the European projects. And then that data becomes completely open access to anybody. So 2023 and 2024 will be next. Those are going to be sort of cleaned up and summarized by our colleagues in Germany, and then similarly published together for anybody to access. Yeah.
So for people who are, scientists who are listening to that and they just have a head full of ideas, what they could potentially do with that, could you tell what is that data, what they can expect, and how to get their hands on it?
Sure. I mean, so you'll be watching out for the data paper in the journal Ecology, but essentially it's very generic in terms of ecological data. There's the times, the dates, the species, the number of animals, and the GPS locations. And then there are some other metrics which are linked to the deployment of cameras, such as how long the camera was working, what the model was, the height of the camera, stuff like that.
Okay, so the actual details of the location of the camera as well.
Yes.
And are they getting access to actual photos, or is it only just aggregated data from the photos?
I believe there is a way to access the photos, but I haven't seen how that works yet. I think it's archived on Wildlife Insights, so those photos should be accessible. In my opinion, normally there is some kind of media folder linked to it, but considering it's across the whole of Europe, it might be terabytes of photos. So approach with caution is what I would say.
Of course. You mentioned that you looked at all those photos, not probably not from entire Europe, but from the Ireland. So obvious question is, why not use machine learning, machine assisted review of those, or maybe you do use I'm cheating because I know that you do use AI to look at the photos, right? But for the purpose of the list, for the listeners, right? The question is why, if you have an automated process to go through the photos, why are you viewing all those photos? Why are you going through all those photos manually? Are you not trusting the computer, or is it other reasons for that?
Yeah, so there's an initial check which I do on every folder that crosses my desk. That is to guarantee that we anonymize any photos of humans, which I mentioned earlier, and second of all, to pull out some highlights, which are always nice to have for reports, for social media, even though I do need to emphasize my social media a bit more and push some of those photos. And then there is the second aspect, which is putting the photos into the camera trap software that we use, which is Wildlife Insights. And in previous years, there was no image classifier associated to it, or it was very generic, very basic, and it couldn't really pick up our species that were essentially geographically isolated, even to Europe, and because most of it was trained on North American data sets or African data sets or Southeast Asia. But what happened is, over time, we've been 2021, 2022, 2023, uploading tens of thousands of photos and adding manual classifications to what those photos are. And in the background, Wildlife Insights is training their algorithm all the time. So essentially, at the stage right now, even from 2024, that algorithm is really good at identifying all the species that we see commonly. There is one other aspect which we still use why we still use people, other than just checking that the AI wasn't incorrect, is that we're interested in deer management. And that means we're interested in stuff like the age and sex of the animals, which the AI is not trained for. It's not that it's not good at it. Might be good at it if it was trained for that, but it simply isn't a priority for anybody training like a species image classifier. But it's important to us. At the very minimum, we want to look at the ratio of males to females, for example, when it comes to deer. So we have somebody checking all the photos, like a volunteer. They confirm if the AI is correct on, let's say, a fox, a pine marten, a red squirrel. And then when it comes to deer, they basically just add in one additional line into the data set that says if it's a male or a female. So that's how we're proceeding basically from this point on. It's AI assisted and machine learning assisted, but there's a human in the loop to confirm and a human in the loop to add that little bit of extra flavor that we want to sort of inform management.
Speaking about Wicklow, Sika dominated, is it?
Sika absolutely dominate when it comes to what we see on the cameras. We have not deployed a functioning camera in Wicklow without Sika as part of Snapshot. We have with other projects, but those were, for example, mostly behind deer fences. So yeah, Sika pretty much, it's somewhere between 70 and 90% of all of the photos will be Sika. Thousands and thousands and thousands of individual observations, not just, you can have 30 photos, but it's only one observation, but we have thousands of observations.
So you're saying observations being different individuals?
Yes. So we have like, it kind of filters down. You might have 100,000 photos from the project, as we did in, I think, 2023, 100,000 photos, maybe 10,000 observations from that. The cameras take more photos than the observations in that sense. But yeah, Sika are absolutely the dominator in our study. We do have loads of red fox. Red fox is normally second. Red squirrel is normally third. And then we have quite a good amount of pine marten as well. Much more than I think we initially expected that we would get. So pine marten appear on probably 50% of the cameras these days, which is really great. Sika, as I said, 100%, and fox is maybe 90%. So there is a big difference still, but I think we're really enthusiastic about how many pine martens we see and where we see them, which is just great because as a species that has had to recover.
How about otters? We found we had an otter when we were checking the camera.
Yeah, and we've had it's been interesting because we have cameras, from quite a high elevation right down to the river valleys, and often really close to water. But from 2021 to 2024, we never saw an otter on a rewild or UCD camera trap from Snapshot Wicklow. And then, Tommy, you're my good luck charm because we went to check the camera after the flood, and who was sitting like 10 photos in, but a lovely big otter. And that is, I think, the third otter this year. So it's been a good year for us for otters. It's always nice to have like a new species. I think we've gotten everything that can be gotten except hedgehogs. We've just never gotten a hedgehog for some reason on our Snapshot cameras, but can still happen.
They're in trouble, hedgehogs.
Yeah, there's loads of reasons why. I think the climate is a bit funny. Winters are a bit funny these days. Extreme weather events. Their predators are fairly common. Not just wild predators like badgers, but dogs and cats are everywhere these days. And then I think the main one is still road traffic collisions. So they obviously stand no chance when it comes to crossing roads.
How about badgers? You mentioned badgers.
Yeah, badgers are fairly common for us as well. They have like quite local kind of population centers where they like to hang out. You'll get like a couple of cameras with no badgers, and then 1 kilometer away there'll be a badger there every night. It tends to be that because they have such strong links to their set, to their kind of home area, that if you so happen to get a camera on a path that the badger is walking regularly, you'll get a lot of badger detections, but they're super strictly nocturnal. It's one of the really cool things about cameras because they're recording 24/7. We can even tell when the animals are active. So the badgers and foxes are really, really nocturnal. The squirrels are really diurnal. They're active basically only in the day. And then the deer have this beautiful bimodal activity pattern where they're active at dawn and dusk, and then they quiet down during the middle of the day, and they're actually really quiet in the middle of the night as well. They don't move around too much.
Listen, I have a question about the observations, because you say that the same individual captured number of times. That's a one observation.
Mm-hmm.
But are you able to recognize the individual A on the same camera? So same individual goes in front of a camera on Monday, and then the same individual goes in front of a camera on Thursday. Are you able to identify that the same individual and therefore collapse it to one observation? And likewise, the same question, only different cameras, or are they spread so far that it's not really possibility to have same animal being on two different cameras?
Yeah. So would it be possible? It probably would, because Sika have these spots in the summer which make them kind of individually identifiable. As well as that, you can identify certain males by their antlers, for example.
Or injuries.
We have some three-legged deer, for example, that often come past the cameras. But we actually choose a very statistical version of what we call an independent observation. Essentially, if an animal is captured, we start this imaginary timer, and then every photo within 5 minutes of that photo is essentially discarded for the purpose of statistical analysis, because it's very likely that's that same individual either mooching around, eating, lying down in front of the camera. So what we do is maintain at least 5 minutes before we call something a statistically independent event. And anytime that animal is still triggering that camera within that 5 minutes, we basically keep extending it. In Wicklow, the cameras are spaced far enough apart that I don't think we see a lot of the same individuals. As I said, I check the cameras myself first, and I have an eye for antlers. It's not like a trophy hunting style thing. I also did my master's thesis on antlers. They're absolutely amazing biologically, first and foremost. But I would definitely know if it was the same stag, for example, on two cameras. And it tends to be, I think I've had that experience of, oh, that's the same guy, only a handful of times. It's really that the cameras are spaced out enough. And the density of Sika as well. And that's the one thing that, when we talk about what we try to use these cameras for, like biologically, we think that these animals have really small home ranges, because either you can't move because of the next animal beside you, and there's so many deer on the ground, it's just not worth it, because you're not going to find extra resources. So I think there's really small home ranges for these animals, and we don't know that yet. We haven't tagged and tracked animals with GPS in a way that we can say that. And trying to use the camera traps to determine home range is just too imprecise.
So in a case obvious case like three-legged deer, right? That you do recognize that well, it's not within the 5 minutes. There was a stop in triggering, and it's like hour apart or 5 hours apart. But it's like, this is that deer. Is this just not part of the methodology that you're not notifying? So you identify this is same deer, but you essentially take no action anyway, and this is classified as two different observations, two different events.
Yeah, because it's essentially two observations, but of the same individual. And when we tend not to talk about individuals when we do a study like this, because most of the animals are not really individually recognizable, and that means all of the assumptions that we make about the behavior is a population level assumption. So when I talk about the behavior of the deer, obviously there's some deer that love to be out during the day, and they never are active at nighttime, because there's just subtle differences between them. But on a population level, that's what they do. And it would be the same with the foxes, for example. One might just be really habituated, not caring about hikers walking around or the general activities going on in the hills, and therefore just happy to wander around during the day. But on the population level, the foxes are nocturnal. So essentially, multiple captures of the same individual, with sufficient time apart from each other, is just telling us more about the population, in the same way that 2 photos or 2 triggers of the camera by deer at another site, which might be the same individuals, would do that even if we don't know it's the same individual.
So how does that impact when you try to assess the population density or the size of the population? Because obviously sharp-minded listeners will say like, whoa, that will make the data inaccurate in that way. So is it like some sort of a statistical analysis in that?
There certainly is ways around that with statistics. Essentially, your sort of survey window should be as short as possible. So we have like a 2-month total survey. Sometimes even extends past that, or even starts before the 2-month survey. But if I was calculating population density, which I'm trying to avoid for the moment because I don't think I necessarily need to, I would keep the survey windows as short as possible to avoid having many repeated captures. But considering how many events of deer that we get, I would say it makes a very little impact on the precision or accuracy of those estimates. And I've done studies, and I've been part of studies for Eurasian lynx, for example, where we do identify the individuals, and we use that and the statistics behind spatially explicit capture-recapture models to calculate the population densities. And they are also fraught with massive amounts of biases. The precision can be really tough to handle when there's low population density animals like lynx. So there's never really like one good way of measuring population density, because it's one of those things. It's a bit like an electron. You as soon as you see it, it's changed already. By the time we've calculated it, it's going to be changed, which is why we try to use as many different kind of population parameters as possible. The ratio of males to females, the number of animals per survey effort, the impact, which is not what we're doing in Snapshot, but has evolved, for example, from Snapshot with the deer impact work in our lab, and the PhD students who are working on linking density and impact there. So there's loads of different things going on at once, because not any one thing tells the perfect story, which is like exactly one of those things when I say, to people that wildlife management and wildlife management isn't rocket science. It's way harder, because you can launch a rocket from Florida and land it on the moon, but good luck trying to count the alligators in the Everglades. You'll never do it.
You're talking about, this is
obviously we have estimates and we have error bars around them and stuff, but it's one of those things as well. Like when it comes to management, I worked with managers in different national parks around Europe, from protected areas, different municipalities in Ireland as well. If I tell them 17 deer per square kilometer or 18 deer per square kilometer, what are they going to change if it's one or the other? What are they going to change if it's 25? There's more subtlety to it than that. Everybody wants population density. It is like this kind of much lauded thing, but it's not necessarily the most important thing. We believe, or certainly I believe, that it's impact. It's you can have these metrics which we can use to sort of parameterize our populations of wild animals, and not one of them by itself is critical, but them linked together is really important. Population density is important, but it's not as important, I think, as people think it is. It's really about impact when it comes to wildlife management. So looking for a balance, and that balance doesn't have to be static. In my opinion, it never should be, because as soon as it's static, like somebody cycling a bike, it will just tip over and there will be problems again. So you need to have this kind of very nice gray area where you can manage populations in a way that they can have some impact, hopefully minimal, and the other activities which need to occur, whether that's planting native trees, whether that's farming, whether that's minimizing road traffic collisions, that those things can be in balance with it as well. And that's as relevant for deer as it is for wild boar, for wolves, even for foxes or pine martens at some stage.
So Snapshot is gathering that data, and that data then can be used for some other research. So you're mentioned. So what is maybe I'm not gonna say what you mentioned, like what interesting projects we are aware of that are using this data?
Yeah, so we have like some internal discussions within our kind of Snapshot Ireland community about what we want to do, looking at how biodiversity is different between different land uses, the different kind of bioregions of Ireland, so to speak, the different protected areas. I can certainly speak about what I'm doing. I am looking at how sika behavior, for example, is different between the different hunting seasons. So before the hunting season starts, during the male season, and then during the open season for males, females, and calves, especially with the links to nocturnal behavior. So it's very much expected that as the hunting pressure increases, the animals become more nocturnal to avoid the human hunting pressure during the day. So that's still ongoing. Hopefully there's a paper to come of that at some point. If not, there will be some part of that in a Snapshot Europe report.
It sounds like this just mandates your another appearance on this podcast. Definitely.
I'm happy with that. And as well as that, I mean, it's Snapshot is linked to, but not part of, other projects in our lab group. We have Deer Impact Project, which is collaboration that I'm not directly employed by Deer Impact. I just essentially come in very much laterally when they need. But UCD, Maynooth, ATU, all come together to look at these different aspects: the impact, the density, the hotspots, the behavior. It's exactly what we need. And I like to feel that Snapshot was one of those things that pushed, that project to get funding from the Department of Agriculture, because all of a sudden Snapshot Europe and our project in Wicklow arrived on the scene, and people went, wow, look at the data that can be collected. And in UCD, that basically, inspired the PhD student project that is looking at density now in Wicklow, in Killarney, and tying it back to the impact is the important thing, because as we said, density by itself is only partially useful. So, I have my part, which is taking Snapshot forward and coordinating as much as possible the people, the projects around Ireland, so that we have, these kind of protocols and metrics for biodiversity monitoring and mammal monitoring on like a wider scale that we've never done before, as well as being able to analyze some specific research questions within that. And then, the students now in UCD taking forward the more, hard hitting, let's really do population densities, let's really do impact. But that's how it should be. I don't think I could ever sit on all of this data and all of those ideas by myself, and I wouldn't want to. I wish there was 20 of me in Ireland. There's 20 of me for the similar sized places in the rest of Europe, which is great, but it means that, I have to pick the things that I'm interested in. I'm just lucky I have funding from one of the big research funding groups in Ireland to be able to kind of address my own research questions for my postdoc. And that deer behavior one is exactly that. It pulls together things that I like. I like, bringing it back to management. I like trying to figure out problems. Like, so what do we do if we have nocturnal sika and we're trying to get the numbers down? Then it's all of a sudden really important for policymakers.
Speaking about policy, excellent segue. Excellent. Speaking about policy, you mentioned earlier that there are efforts in Ireland to, put the manners on deer management. We talked about it with Ashley Glover. I know that you guys are working together as well. So that was episode 200. I'm curious of your assessment. How is it going? Because I personally, I am sort of critical about this. I don't think there's enough people with expertise in deer management. The chair is a dairy farmer. Dairy farmers are well known about their extensive and deep knowledge of deer behavior. There is no scientists on the groups, or at least I can't recall many. So I guess the questions is twofold. Like, one, what is, like, are you tracking these efforts close enough to be able to offer any opinions on it? And secondly, what is the path or how to fill the gap between here's the science, here's the research, and here's the policy. And we spoke about this on the podcast many times, that private discussions with policymakers that I had were just, I was face palming because it was suboptimal, let's say it that way. So I'm curious your assessment and your views on, like, how can we make sure that findings from Snapshot projects and projects that are building on top of Snapshot will find their way into policy.
Yeah, as I said before, wildlife management, it's not easy. The best thing about having scientists on board is that you're measuring things. And if you can't measure them, you can't improve them because you have no idea where you're going. And I do not envy the guys doing the Irish deer management work, because that is a really, really, really tough task. So for people who don't know, there's an Irish Deer Management Strategy Group, which is essentially a sort of expert group who make recommendations for the management of deer in Ireland, and that those recommendations are being funded through the Department of Agriculture and being implemented by Farm Relief Services. So all of the guys that I've met who are part of the FRS team implementing the deer management across Ireland, or implementing the recommendations of the Irish Deer Management Strategy Group, it's more accurate to say, those guys are all absolute gentlemen. I've never had a bad or negative interaction with them. They're hard workers, they're smart. Obviously, in my opinion, it should be much closer linked to the science, and it should be much closer linked to the monitoring. It's like trying to run a business without an accountant, in my opinion. Just really, really difficult to do, because you're basically not tracking your progress when it comes to the actual management of deer. Now, what we have got in UCD is luckily a really great relationship with basically every project partner that we have. Nobody is our enemy. We like to think that in that sense, everyone is our friend. We have expertise, we have techniques, we're building up a scientific knowledge base that previously didn't exist. I could sit here and list 100 things that we don't know about deer before I could list 100 things that we do. But the idea being that, we need to find the right metrics. We need to find the right type of connection between the management and the research to drive these things forward in a way that's really productive. And I am very skeptical that that's going to happen, because it hasn't happened so far. I think we're nearly a year in. As I said, it's not an easy thing to do because there's so many other things to take into account. I mean, just simply dealing with landowners is just a massive, massive aching problem. Dealing with the policies that exist already, whether it's firearms, whether it's the Wildlife Act, there's so many things that could be different or could be changed, or I think that we in UCD would have a great, set of opinions on, that would make deer management easier. And not only that, could be safer, just more efficient, but it just hasn't really worked like that. Ireland is a funny place. You can have all the credentials in the world, but if you're not, the person at that, on that podium at that time, it might not be there for you to be able to voice that opinion. I just, I only want to wish them the best, and they know that we are there to help them when we can, and if they come knocking on my door, I know I haven't had the right discussions yet, but when they come knocking on my door and say, hey, that data from Wicklow, could you talk us through it and let's see where we're going and what we're tracking, at least I can help them there, and it will be an absolute pleasure for me to do that, because if I think I can have an impact, I'm going to do it. It's just the way I'm programmed. And, for me, that's an absolutely perfect outlet for that. So we'll have to just wait and see. I mean, they have 4 years of that tender, and then it'll be assessed again, and the Deer Management Strategy Group will make a decision on, how they want to proceed. And the idea being eventually that Ireland will have some kind of deer management agency. In my opinion, it probably should be part of NPWS. When it comes to the remit for wildlife, it should be an open and shut case that Parks and Wildlife Service do that. And it doesn't necessarily have to be that, every ranger is out there shooting deer just to keep numbers down, but a dedicated deer unit that could coordinate deer management, not just within public lands, but also to help with private lands as well. Because you know what? Every other country basically does deer management better than we do. I'm not saying everybody's perfect, but there are ways to do it. And for us to just, sort of, in my opinion, it feels like just flailing around. And then we go, okay, let's look at what the English do, or let's do what the Scottish do. Not exactly, gold standards when it comes to deer management. Obviously, there's stuff being changed and there's stuff making a lot of progress. But I would have looked first at the most, community-based wildlife management that I could think of. That's, I think, where I would have went first. And I would have went to Europe for that, I think. Where people really come together and they talk about it in a way that it's part and parcel of the community. It's not something that we have to be really shady about, like, oh, that guy's a hunter, he's very scary. There's nothing scary about it. People have been hunting since people evolved. It's just, breaking down those barriers as well are just huge. And that comes right back to the food. I mean, the food is a huge aspect of it. You can very easily, convince people with good food. And when it comes to deer management, that's one of the great outputs. And how cool is that? Because there's so much wildlife management where you don't have such tangible outputs. So look, it's not easy. I wish them the best. And I just hope that, what we do from the research point of view is taken on board in the best way, and that, it can be interpreted by the managers such as that they can make the best impact and, sort of bring back the balance to the system that we really need when it comes to Irish nature.
Knowing what you know about deer and hunting in Ireland and in Europe, what would be, and I don't want to ask you for like a specific changes, and if you have something in mind, then please feel free to talk about it. But I'm more curious about like in your general trajectory that you would like hunting in Ireland and deer management, because the reality is that hunters are doing deer management in Ireland. I think that's the part of the problem, that hunting is fairly, I don't want to say loosely regulated, because it is regulated, and the regulations are very specific, but it is very accessible. You don't have to go, you don't have to be part of any organization. You don't have to be part of an Irish deer hunting organization or anything like that. License is free. And I know for a fact, and we know, and I don't think this is part of an Irish nature or culture. I think it's just a human nature that, any attempts of regulating that or putting some guardrails around that would be very badly received. Like we know, like the big upset that was like introduction of a HCAP, but like now everybody needs to have a HCAP, which is Hunters Competence Assessment Program for people who don't know what a HCAP is. So in general terms, in the broad stroke trajectory, like how do you see where we should go with hunting? Is the hunting not accessible enough? Is it too accessible? Is it not regulated enough? It is like, because my view on this is like, on one hand, it is like, if you're of a certain mindset and certain mind frame, hunting is very easily accessible to some, in terms of like, and people know there is I put out a guide for how to get started with deer hunting, and the link is somewhere in the description of this show as well. And so that's, on one hand, it's easy. On another hand, to some people, it is way harder than if there was an organization where you can just enroll and, queue up in line, and eventually you get your opportunity. You need to sort of work on that opportunity. So enough of me. Curious of your views in general on trajectory of the changes that are required to improve deer management in Ireland, and crucially, should that deer management be primarily hunter based?
Yeah, I think this is a hard one because I think no matter who I pick or what I pick, someone will be responsible for it, or has to be, and in a lot of cases that's going to be hunters. And like you said, for people to be upset about a competency and training program, obviously if you've done hunting for years, you can have an opinion on that, but everywhere else you have to do a lot of competency, and it's much more comprehensive. And not even everyone passes, whereas here I feel like nearly everybody can pass if they're in any way competent. So possibly, as much as it would pain me to say it, I think hunters have a really big responsibility, and it's not just about it. When you have this privilege and this opportunity, it really needs protecting, in my opinion. And that means being as involved in all of the conservation management aspects as possible. And that means being involved as not only a hunter, but as a conservationist. And the responsibility there is learning about good deer management. It's about learning, you can't argue that Sika isn't an invasive species. It's just, you're not going to win that argument because scientifically you've nothing to stand on. Whereas science-based wildlife management and deer management has a huge scientific basis. There's so much science to rely on, and there's cultural aspects and others as well. Picking those arguments will make you able to protect hunting as your opportunity, and it will make our lives as deer managers or scientists better, because we want you to collect the data. There's just one of me, but there's 6,000 licensed hunters in Ireland. If every one of them was collecting data systematically, we'd have so much to track, and we'd know exactly which knobs on the dial to turn that would give us the kind of balance in the system what we want, where we can have opportunity, where we can have forest regeneration, where we can have less impact on agriculture. So possibly, in my opinion, there's a lot to be said for education and getting hunters involved in a really holistic aspect, and that also means involving the people around you, even if they're not hunters, which is a tough thing because you have to shoulder a lot of responsibility. The second aspect, which kind of comes to my mind, is not necessarily regulation, but it's enforcement. And it's very much tied to what I just mentioned, because, for example, you or me doing our hunting return at the end of the year, there's no verifiable way of making sure that's correct. But there are ways that other countries do that help, verify some of that. For example, some of the provinces in Italy, when they shoot roe deer, they keep the lower left jaw so that they have a genetic and a morphological track of all the animals, and you have to basically check in that jaw. That's not impossible for us to do in this country, at least even for small areas, and even switch areas every year. And it would, keep hunters really involved in the system, honest. There's data flowing from it. We can make more decisions. But there's no enforcement, in my opinion, or no good enforcement of hunting regulations in Ireland. It's where enforcement ends, that's where ethics begins anyway. So when this is really tied to what I just mentioned. There's a lot of responsibility on hunters, and ethics is part of that as well. So I would like to see some more enforcement. I would like that I know that when I go out, that I don't have to worry about, poachers, for example, or someone coming illegally onto the land with a firearm, not knowing I'm there. It's a huge risk for me. It's a huge risk for the landowner. But it's really hard, obviously, to regulate. I understand that. I would love to think more about that and delve deeper into it. But, if I was thinking about broad strokes, what I would like to do, I think, so if I could sum it up, I think it would be education and enforcement.
Yeah, especially education. I think.
Especially education. No, that's absolutely fundamental.
We have this on a different podcast. We have this discussion, and some people disagree, but I still think that education is at the core solution to every problem. Like long term, almost every problem has an educational solution to it. Adam, podcast listeners listening to this conversation, they just blown away by the project Snapshot Wicklow, Snapshot Europe, and you mentioned volunteers. Are you still looking for more volunteers? And if yes, can they get involved, and how can they get involved?
For volunteers, we're absolutely oversubscribed.
Really?
I would say, yeah. Between as UCD students, we've sent it out to a couple of different years of biologists, and the response has been overwhelming. We have our Rewild Wicklow volunteers. We have a couple of volunteers through MPWS as well. I would say if you are absolutely a fundamentalist, you really, really wanted to tag camera trap photos, you can find me on Twitter, or X now, at Adam F. Smith. You can basically find me at the same handle on Instagram. Those are the two best ways to get in contact with me. Just send me a message. I will see it. Blue Sky as well. Sorry, I forgot to mention Blue Sky. But please keep an eye out for all of the media that we're doing. I think Rewild Wicklow are doing the best job at this, getting people talking about the project. You'll see us in the newspapers. You'll hear us on the radio, especially local stations. And that's just going to continue more and more. So, keep one ear on your radio, one eye on your social media feed. You'll see our project come up again. And in that case, just like and share it, offer your support, because it is a lot of volunteer work. It's a lot of work me and my colleagues do very much outside of our, paid hours. So we're super happy if anybody is, engaging with the project at all.
Oh, okay. I thought you said you're oversubscribed, meaning that you have too many volunteers.
We have too many, but share and like and talk about it.
Gotcha.
That would be perfect as well.
Gotcha. What's the future for the project? So is it running indefinitely, or is it like how many years still to go? Like what's the plan there?
Well, my plan at the moment is that the project runs sort of semi-indefinitely. What I would like is that the new projects that start up, after maybe 1 or 2 years of having me coordinate and help them, that they become more independent. And we just keep going then with the project in Wicklow. And, if that's the case, if all it's doing is contributing long-term data, and we'll get to see, changes, and there will be questions and ideas that come from that we haven't even dreamed of yet. What happens if tomorrow we get an outbreak of chronic wasting disease, or some other thing happens? There could be a massive forest fire. All of a sudden we've got new research questions, and because we were tracking and monitoring, we can actually address them. If we sit back and say, well, we've done 5 years now, let's just analyze that data for the next 15, that's not going to be able to answer tomorrow's questions. So I would like that the project continues as much as possible.
Right, just to keep the data flowing, because then fresh data is required. Listen, Adam, thank you so much for this conversation. It's been a pleasure as always, fascinating. I am looking forward to your research on deer behavior and the response to different hunting seasons and all that. So definitely we'll follow up on that. And for now, keep doing great work. It is great that we have people like you who are just willing to start something from the ground and are focused on impact. So great stuff, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Tommy.
Before you go, since you stick to the end of this show, then first and foremost, thank you so much for listening and for watching. And if you enjoy what I do here, and I presume you do since you listen to the very end, you should subscribe to my newsletter. The link is in the description of the show, newsletter.tommysoutdoors.com. So get in there and you will get notifications not only about the latest episodes of the podcast, but also about everything else that is happening in the conservation and science world.